Jake stood near the entrance of the grand hall, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. The royal palace was unlike anything he had seen before. Walls made of crystal caught the light and threw it back in colors he could not name. The ceiling stretched so high above that he could barely see it. Everywhere he looked, tall figures moved with grace, their bodies made of something that looked like living glass. He had been working security for Earth's diplomatic corps for 3 years now, but this assignment still felt strange. They were nothing like humans. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their crystalline bodies shifting through shades of blue and silver. They did not have faces the way humans did. Instead, light pulsed through them to show emotion, patterns that Jake was still learning to read. Ambassador Helen Grant stood across the room, speaking with a group of nobles. She wore a simple blue dress that looked plain next to the elaborate robes of their hosts. She had told Jake before they arrived that this reception was important. The controlled 3 systems in this sector, and Earth wanted better trade agreements. Everything needed to go perfectly. Jake touched the small earpiece hidden beneath his hair. The other security officers checked in one by one. Everything was quiet, normal. He let himself relax just a little. The reception was being held in the east wing of the palace, in a section that had built recently. They called it the Thermal Gardens. It was an experiment, they said. Most of their world was frozen, covered in ice that never melted. They had never known heat the way humans did, so they had built these gardens to study warm weather plants from other worlds. It was a curiosity to them, a scientific puzzle. Jake had read the briefing files during the journey here, came from a planet where the average temperature was minus 40 degrees. Their bodies were built for cold. Heat was dangerous to them. Anything above 70 degrees could damage their crystalline structure. Anything above 100 could kill them. The thought seemed impossible to Jake, who had grown up in Colorado. He remembered summers where the temperature climbed past 90 degrees and everyone just complained about it. He remembered working as a firefighter in Denver, running into buildings where the heat reached 500 degrees or more. His body could take it. He would sweat, and his skin would burn if he was not careful, but he could survive. They could not imagine such things. A server approached Jake with a tray. The drinks inside the crystal glasses glowed softly. Jake shook his head with a polite smile. He was on duty. The server moved on without offense. Across the hall, Queen entered through the main doors. The crowd shifted immediately, creating a clear path. She moved like water, smooth and controlled. Her body was a deeper blue than the others, and patterns of silver light moved beneath her surface like slow lightning. Jake had been told she was one of the oldest alive, nearly 300 years. She looked ageless. Behind the Queen walked a smaller figure. Princess was only 8 cycles old, which Jake's briefing had said was roughly equivalent to 8 human years. She looked like a miniature version of her mother, though her crystalline body was lighter in color, almost clear in some places. She held close to the Queen's side, her light pulsing in patterns that Jake guessed meant she was nervous. Ambassador Grant bowed deeply as the Queen approached. Jake could not hear their conversation from where he stood, but he saw the ambassador gesture toward the thermal gardens. The Queen's light pulsed in what might have been interest. The group began moving toward the gardens. Jake followed at a respectful distance, keeping his eyes on the ambassador as he was supposed to. Other security officers moved with them, forming a loose perimeter. The thermal gardens were behind tall crystal doors that slid open as they approached. Warm air rolled out, and Jake saw several step back from it. To them, it must have felt like standing in front of an oven. To Jake, it felt like a pleasant spring day. Inside the gardens, earth plants grew in carefully controlled sections. Jake recognized tomatoes, wheat, and something that looked like corn. There were flowers, too, bright reds and yellows that seemed to glow against the crystal walls. In the center of the room stood a large tree that Jake did not recognize. Its leaves were gold and orange. They had set up cooling stations around the room, places where their people could stand beneath vents that blew cold air. Even with these precautions, Jake noticed that most of them stayed near the exits. Only the bravest ones ventured close to the plants. Queen seemed genuinely interested. She stood near a section of roses, her light pulsing in quick patterns as a scientist explained something to her. Princess wandered a few steps away, looking at a patch of sunflowers that towered over her. Jake checked his watch. They had been in the gardens for 20 minutes. Everything was going well. Too well, perhaps. He had learned in his years of security work that when everything seemed perfect, something was usually about to go wrong. The first sign of trouble was a smell. Jake's nose caught it before anyone else noticed. It was sharp and bitter, like burning plastic. He turned toward the source and saw thin smoke rising from a control panel on the far wall. He took a step forward, his hand already reaching for his radio. Before he could speak, the panel exploded in a shower of sparks. Flames burst from the wall, racing up the crystal surface faster than Jake would have thought possible. The crystals, apparently, burned very well when they got hot enough. Alarms screamed through the room. The nearest to the fire scattered immediately, their lights flashing in patterns that Jake understood as pure terror. Queen grabbed Princess and turned toward the exit. But the fire was spreading too fast. It jumped from the control panel to the golden tree in the center of the room. The tree went up like a torch, flames roaring into the air. The heat must have triggered something in the walls because more panels began to spark and catch fire. Jake ran toward the ambassador. Helen Grant was already moving toward the exit, pushed along by the crowd of panicking. He caught her arm and guided her through the doors into the main hall. Outside the gardens, chaos filled the palace, ran in every direction. Their lights flashed so rapidly that the hallway looked like a lightning storm. Guards tried to establish order, but they were just as terrified as everyone else. Fire was not something they knew how to fight. Jake counted heads quickly. Ambassador Grant was safe. The other security officers were reporting in through his earpiece. The dignitaries were evacuating toward the outer courtyards where the air was cooler. Then he heard it, a voice calling out in the language. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Desperation. Fear. Queen stood near the garden doors, her body flashing with light so bright it hurt to look at. She was calling into the gardens, but the heat rolling out of the doors kept her back. Her guards tried to pull her away, but she fought against them. Jake pushed through the crowd. When he reached the queen, he looked where she was pointing. Through the smoke and flames, he could see a small crystalline figure. Princess stood in a side chamber of the gardens, separated from the main room by a crystal wall. The explosion must have triggered safety doors that sealed her inside. She was trapped. The heat in the main garden was rising fast. Jake could see it in the way the air shimmered. The temperature in that room was probably close to 200 degrees now and climbing. The chamber where stood would be heating up too. For a child, it would be fatal in minutes. Queen grabbed Jake's arm. Her touch was cold like ice and he could feel her shaking. She did not speak his language, but she did not need to. Her meaning was clear. Jake looked at the burning gardens. He looked at the small figure visible through the smoke. He thought of his niece back on Earth, who was about the same age. He thought of the promise he had made when he took this job, to protect the people under his care. The guards were shouting, probably telling him it was suicide to go in there. They were right. For them, it would be. For a human, though, it was just a very bad fire. Jake pulled off his jacket and ran toward the garden fountain that stood in the hallway. He dunked the jacket in the water, soaking it completely. Then he wrapped it around his head and shoulders. Ambassador Grant was shouting his name. The other security officers were calling through his. The heat hit Jake like a physical wall. It pressed against his skin and tried to force the air from his lungs. The wet jacket steamed instantly, but it gave him a few precious seconds of protection. He kept his eyes low where the smoke was thinner and moved fast. The thermal gardens were a nightmare of flame and burning crystal. The walls had started to crack from the heat, making sounds like breaking glass. Pieces fell from the ceiling, shattering on the floor in sprays of razor-sharp fragments. Jake dodged them, keeping his focus on the chamber where he had seen the princess. His years as a firefighter kicked in. He read the fire the way other people read books. The flames were moving from the control panel toward the exterior walls where the cooling systems had been installed. Those systems were probably full of chemicals that would make the fire worse. He had maybe 2 minutes before this whole section of the palace became an inferno. The smoke was thick, black, and oily. It came from the burning crystal and from the plants. Jake stayed bent over, keeping his face as close to the floor as he could. There was always cleaner air near the ground. Fire rose, smoke rose, but the bottom 6 inches of any room usually stayed clear. He could not see the princess anymore. The smoke had filled the space between them. But he remembered where the chamber was. Straight ahead past the burning tree, then left along the wall, maybe 30 yards. It felt like miles. His lungs were starting to burn. The wet jacket was drying out fast and heat was seeping through to his skin. He could feel his arms starting to hurt where they were exposed. First-degree burns, probably. He would worry about that later. A section of wall collapsed to his right, sending up a shower of crystal fragments and flame. Jake threw his arm over his face and kept moving. A piece of crystal sliced across his forearm, drawing blood, but he barely felt it. The adrenaline was pumping too hard. He reached the burning tree. The heat here was incredible. The air itself seemed to be on fire. Jake could smell his hair starting to singe. He pulled the jacket around his head and shoulders and pushed past the tree, moving as fast as he dared. Then he saw the chamber door. It was made of crystal like everything else, and it had sealed automatically when the fire started. Through the distorted surface, Jake could see a small figure huddled in the corner. Princess was curled into a ball, her crystalline body flickering with dim light. Jake grabbed the door handle and immediately regretted it. The metal was hot enough to burn his palm. He gritted his teeth and pulled anyway. The door did not move. It was locked, sealed by some kind of safety mechanism that was supposed to protect the person inside. Instead, it had become a trap. Jake looked around for something to break the door with. The crystal was thick and strong, designed to contain hazardous experiments. He needed something heavy and hard. His eyes fell on a broken piece of the support structure that had held up the golden tree. It was metal, twisted from the heat but still solid. He grabbed it with his already burned hand and swung it at the door. The impact sent vibrations up his arms. The door cracked but did not break. He swung again. Another crack appeared. A third swing and the crystal shattered, leaving a hole just big enough to reach through. Jake unlocked the door from the inside and pulled it open. Heat rushed into the chamber like a living thing, looked up at him with eyes that were just patterns of light in her crystalline face. She did not recognize him. To her, he was just another terrifying part of this nightmare. Jake dropped to his knees, making himself smaller and less threatening. He held out his hands slowly, the way he would approach a scared animal, shrank back against the wall. Her light was pulsing in rapid, panicked patterns. He did not speak her language, and she did not speak his. But fear was universal, and so was the need for comfort. Jake remembered his niece, Emma, and how she had been afraid of the dark when she was small. He had learned that sometimes words did not matter. Sometimes you just needed to show that you were safe. Jake pointed to himself, then to the door, then two. He made a walking motion with his fingers. Then he pointed to the door again and shook his head, making an X with his arms. He was trying to tell her that they needed to leave, but the path was dangerous. Seemed to understand. Her light pulsed a little slower. She looked at the door, at the smoke and flames beyond it, and her light went rapid again. Jake had an idea. He took off the wet jacket and wrapped it around small body. It was still damp in places, and it would protect her from the worst of the heat. Then he turned around and crouched down, pointing to his back. Hesitated for only a moment. Then she climbed onto his back, her crystalline arms wrapping around his neck. She was lighter than Jake expected, but cold. Her body temperature was probably close to freezing. Against his burned skin, it almost felt good. Jake stood up carefully, making sure was secure. Her arms tightened around his neck. He could feel her shaking, but she was brave enough to trust him. That was all he needed. He stepped out of the chamber and back into the inferno. The fire had grown worse in the few minutes he had been inside. Flames covered most of the walls now, and the ceiling was starting to sag from the heat. Jake calculated their chances and did not like the answer, but there was no choice. They had to try. He started back the way he had come, moving as fast as he could while protecting. She buried her face against his shoulder, trying to escape the smoke. Jake bent low again, searching for that clean air near the floor. A beam fell from the ceiling directly in front of them. It crashed down in an explosion of sparks and flame, blocking their path. Jake turned left, looking for another route. The servant corridors, he remembered seeing them on the briefing maps. They ran along the outer walls of the gardens, used by the staff to move supplies without disturbing the guests. He found a service door and kicked it open. The corridor beyond was narrow and filled with smoke, but it was not on fire yet. Jake ran down it, one hand holding secure on his back, the other trailing along the wall to guide him through the darkness. Behind them, he heard a massive crash. Part of the garden ceiling had collapsed. If they had stayed in the main room, they would have been crushed. The corridor turned right, then left. Jake tried to remember the map. These passages should lead to the exterior courtyard where they had their cooling stations. It would be safe there, they just needed to keep moving. Coughed against his shoulder. The smoke was getting to her. Jake could feel her grip weakening. He moved faster, ignoring the pain in his burned hands and arms, ignoring the way his lungs screamed for clean air. The corridor opened into a larger room. Jake's heart sank. This was a storage area for the garden equipment, and it was starting to burn. Worse, the floor had collapsed in the center. A hole gaped in front of them, dropping down into darkness. Flames licked up from below, and Jake could hear the roar of the fire spreading through the lower levels. There was no way around the hole. The room was not big enough. They would have to go back and find another route. But when Jake turned around, he saw that the corridor they had come through was now blocked by falling debris. Flames filled the doorway. They were trapped. Jake looked at the hole, at the flames rising from it. He looked at the walls, searching for any other exit. There had to be something. He had not come this far to fail now. Then he saw it, on the far side of the room, barely visible through the smoke. A window. It was high up on the wall, probably 8 feet off the ground, but it was there, and it was open. Jake ran to the wall beneath the window. He could not reach it while carrying, and there was nothing to climb on. The storage shelves had all collapsed in the fire. He had one chance. Jake reached back and carefully lifted from his shoulders. She looked at him with those light-filled eyes, terrified and confused. He pointed to the window, then to her, then made a climbing motion. She understood. Children were apparently smarter than human children at the same age. She grabbed onto Jake's shoulders as he braced himself against the wall. Then she climbed up his body, using him like a ladder. Her crystalline fingers found holds on his clothes and skin. It hurt, but Jake did not move. Reached his shoulders, then stood on them. Jake could feel her weight shifting as she reached for the window. For a terrible moment, he thought she would not be able to reach it. Then he felt her weight disappear. She had made it through. Now came the hard part. Jake backed up, then ran at the wall. He jumped, reaching for the windowsill. His burned fingers caught the edge, and he pulled himself up with strength he did not know he had. His muscles screamed in protest, but he kept going. He hauled himself through the window just as the floor behind him collapsed completely. The entire storage room dropped away into the burning levels below. Jake tumbled out onto a balcony. Clean, cold air filled Jake's lungs. He lay on his back for a moment, just breathing, feeling the princess's small, crystalline body shaking next to him. They were outside, but they were not safe yet. The balcony was 3 stories up, and there were no stairs. Below them, Jake could see the emergency responders setting up equipment. He could see Queen, her light flashing brighter than the sun. He looked at and she looked back at him. They had made it this far together. They would make it the rest of the way. Jake stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, they were pointing up at them, their lights flashing in patterns he could not read. But he saw them moving equipment into position, some kind of field or cushion to catch them. Queen stood in the courtyard below, her body flashing with light so intense that the other had to look away. She had never felt anything like this before. Fear was not an emotion her people were meant to show. Queens especially were expected to maintain control, to be steady and calm no matter what happened. But her daughter was trapped in that burning building, and there was nothing steady or calm about what she felt now. Her chief guard, Commander Vilas, stood beside her trying to explain why they could not go in after the princess. His light pulsed in careful, measured patterns, logical patterns. The heat was too intense. Any who entered would die within seconds. The fire suppression systems had failed. The building was collapsing. They had to wait for specialized equipment. Barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the flames consuming the east wing of her palace. Somewhere in that inferno was her child, her only child. Then the human had run inside, had seen it happen. The human guard, the one who had been following the Earth ambassador, had wrapped himself in wet cloth and charged into the flames without hesitation. It had been the most foolish and the bravest thing she had ever witnessed. The other humans were shouting. The ambassador, Helen Grant, was calling the guard's name. Jake, they were calling him. Jake filed the name away in her memory. If he survived, she would need to know it. If he died, she would need to remember it. Commander Vilas was speaking again. The gravitational cushion units were being moved into position. If the human managed to reach the princess, if they made it to a window or balcony, the cushions could catch them when they jumped. It was the best they could do. Watched the palace burn and tried to calculate time. How long could a human survive in those temperatures? The briefing files said they were remarkable durable. They came from a cold Earth where the conditions were harsh beyond understanding. They could tolerate heat that would shatter crystal. They could breathe air that would poison lungs. But there were limits. There had to be limits. Minutes passed like hours. The fire grew worse. Part of the roof collapsed, sending flames shooting into the sky. Heard screams from the crowd of nobles and servants who had gathered in the courtyard. They all knew Princess was inside. They all knew what that meant. Ambassador Grant approached, flanked by 2 more human guards. The ambassador's face was pale and her eyes were wet. Humans cried when they were sad, remembered. They leaked water from their eyes. It was strange, but somehow fitting. "Your Majesty," the ambassador said in careful, her accent thick but understandable. "We have contacted our ship. They have fire suppression equipment. They can be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Slight pulsed in acknowledgement, but she knew it would be too late. No one could survive 10 minutes in that fire, not even a human. Then someone shouted. A technician operating the gravitational cushions was pointing at the 3rd floor of the burning wing. His eyes followed the direction, and her light blazed with sudden hope. 2 figures stood on a balcony. One was large and dark, clearly human. The other was small and crystalline, unmistakably. The courtyard erupted in flashing lights and shouted commands. The technicians adjusted their equipment, moving the gravitational cushions directly below the balcony. Commander Vilas was already running toward that section, calling for medical teams to stand by. Ran too. She did not care about protocol or dignity. She ran like she had not run in centuries, her crystalline legs carrying her across the courtyard in long, desperate strides. She reached the cushion zone just as the human guard appeared at the edge of the balcony. Even from 3 stories below, could see that he was badly hurt. His skin was red and blistered. His clothes were burned and torn. Smoke rose from his body. But he was standing, and he was holding. The princess was wrapped in what looked like a wet jacket. She clung to the human guard, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Could see her daughter's light pulsing weakly. She was alive, but she needed help soon. The human looked down at them, saw him assess the situation, saw him look at the gravitational cushions and the gathered crowd. She saw the moment he made his decision. He pulled around to his chest, securing her against him with one arm. Then he climbed onto the balcony railing. Light flashed in alarm. The jump was at least 40 feet. If the cushions failed, if they were not positioned correctly, they would both die. But the human did not hesitate. He looked at, seemed to say something to her, and then he jumped. They fell through the air. The human curled around the princess, protecting her with his body. The gravitational cushions caught them perfectly, slowing their descent until they touched the ground as gently as a falling leaf. Reached them first. She knelt beside her daughter, her hands shaking as she touched crystalline face. The princess's light pulsed in recognition, and she reached for her mother with weak arms. "Mother," said in their language, her voice barely a whisper. "The human saved me. He carried me through the fire." Gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling the unnatural warmth in his body. She had been exposed to dangerous heat levels. She needed treatment immediately, but she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Medical teams surrounded them, scanners already working to assess condition. Did not let go, but she looked over at the human who still lay on the ground nearby. Jake was on his back, breathing hard. His eyes were closed and his body trembled. Human medical personnel were rushing toward him, carrying equipment did not recognize. The humans were shouting in their language, quick and urgent. Commander Vilas appeared at side. "Your Majesty, we need to move the princess to the medical facility." Nodded, but she did not take her eyes off the human. "That man risked his life for my daughter. See that he receives the best care we can provide." "The humans have requested to treat him themselves," Vilas said. "They say they understand his biology better, but we have made our facilities available." Good stood slowly, still holding. Her daughter was so light, so fragile. The thought of how close she had come to losing her maid's light flash in patterns she could not control. She walked toward Jake. The human medical team was working on him quickly and efficiently. They had torn away his burned clothing and were applying strange white foam to his injuries. One of them was putting a mask over his face, feeding him clean air. Jake's eyes opened. They were brown, noticed, deep brown like the rich soil from Earth that she had seen in diplomatic gifts. Those eyes found her and focused despite the obvious pain he was in. Knelt beside him. Protocol said she should not. Queens did not kneel before anyone, but protocol had not saved her daughter. This human had. "Thank you," she said in his language. The words felt awkward in her mouth, but she needed him to understand. "You saved my child." Jake tried to smile, though it looked more like a grimace. "She's brave," he said, his voice rough from smoke. "Braver than me." One of the human medics touched his arm gently. "Your Majesty, we need to get him to our medical bay. His injuries are serious." Nodded and stood, she looked down at Jake one more time. "We will speak again," she promised. "When you have recovered, we will speak." She carried toward the medical facility, surrounded by guards and doctors. Behind her, she heard the humans lifting Jake onto some kind of transport. She heard Ambassador Grant giving orders, her voice tight with worry. The medical facility was in the palace's north wing, far from the fire. Finally allowed the doctors to take from her arms and place her in a treatment pod. The pod filled with cooling mist, bringing his body temperature back down to safe levels. Stood beside the pod, watching her daughter's light gradually strengthen. The doctors reported their findings. Had been exposed to temperatures of nearly 150 degrees. That was catastrophic. She had suffered damage to her outer crystalline layers, and her internal temperature had risen to dangerous levels. But she would recover. With treatment, she would be completely healed within a week. Barely heard the details. She kept thinking about those minutes when she had watched the palace burn, knowing her daughter was inside. She kept thinking about the human who had run into that fire without armor or special equipment, armed with nothing but wet cloth and determination. Commander Vilas brought reports throughout the evening. The fire was under control now, contained by human equipment from the Earth ship in orbit. The East Wing was a total loss, but the rest of the palace was safe. There had been no other casualties. And the human, Jake, was stable. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening. The human doctors said he would need several weeks to heal, but he would make a full recovery. Listened to all of this with half her attention. The other half was focused on who had finally fallen asleep in the treatment pod. Her daughter's light pulsed slowly and steadily, the rhythm of peaceful rest. When the immediate crisis was over, when was sleeping safely and the doctors assured there was no more danger, Commander Vilas approached with a question. "Your Majesty, what do you wish to do about the human guard?" Turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "He violated several protocols by entering the burning building. He endangered the diplomatic mission. Some of the council members believe there should be consequences." Slight flashed bright with sudden anger. "Consequences? He saved the heir to the throne. He risked his life to save my daughter when none of our people could." "I understand, Your Majesty, but protocol—" "Protocol," interrupted, her voice cold, "did not run into a burning building. Protocol did not carry my daughter through flames that would have killed any of us instantly. That human did, and for that he deserves honor, not punishment." Vilas bowed his head, his light dimming in submission. "Of course, Your Majesty, how would you like to proceed?" Looked back at sleeping peacefully in her pod. She thought about the debt she now owed. In culture, a life debt was sacred. When someone saved your life, you were bound to them until that debt was repaid. When someone saved the life of your child, the debt was even greater. But this went beyond cultural obligation. This went to the heart of who was, what she valued. This human had shown courage, that understanding. He had shown compassion for a child who was not even his species. He had demonstrated the very best qualities any being could possess. "When the human recovers," said slowly, "I will speak with him personally. I will offer him something that has never been offered to an outsider before." "Your Majesty." "The royal favor," said, "I will offer him the royal favor." Commander Vilas' light pulsed in shock. The royal favor was ancient, rarely used even among. It created a permanent bond between the recipient and the royal family. It granted privileges that no ordinary citizen could dream of. It was the highest honor the throne could bestow. "Your Majesty, the council will object. No outsider has ever." "The council did not watch my daughter nearly die tonight," said quietly. "I did, and I watched a human risk everything to save her. If that does not earn the royal favor, then nothing does." She turned away from Vilas, ending the conversation. Her decision was made. The council could object all they wanted. She was queen, and this was her right. Jake had given her back her daughter. She would spend the rest of her life ensuring Jake woke up in pain. It was not the sharp, immediate pain of the fire. This was deeper, duller, the kind of pain that told him his body was working hard to heal itself. He opened his eyes slowly and found himself staring at a white ceiling. The medical bay of the Earth diplomatic ship. He recognized it from the safety briefings. He was lying on a bed with some kind of gel covering his arms and chest. The gel was cool and took the edge off the burning sensation in his skin. "You're awake." Jake turned his head carefully. Ambassador Helen Grant sat in a chair beside his bed. She looked tired, her eyes red like she had been crying or had not slept. Probably both. "How long?" Jake asked. His voice came out rough and scratchy. 3 days, Helen said. "You've been in and out of consciousness. The doctors said you had second-degree burns on 40% of your body, smoke inhalation, a cracked rib from when you jumped. They said you're lucky to be alive." Jake tried to laugh, but it hurt too much. "Doesn't feel lucky." Helen stood and poured water from a pitcher into a glass. She held it while Jake drank through a straw. The water tasted like the best thing he had ever consumed. "The princess?" Jake asked when he finished drinking. "She's fine, completely recovered. They have amazing medical technology. She was released from treatment 2 days ago." Helen sat back down. "Jake, what you did was insane. Brave, yes, but absolutely insane. Couldn't leave her there. You could have died. You nearly did die. The doctors said another minute in those temperatures and your organs would have started to fail." Jake closed his eyes. He remembered the heat, the smoke, the weight on his back. He remembered thinking that if he did not make it out, at least he had tried. At least he had not stood there and done nothing. "There's something else," Helen said. "Queen has been asking about you every day. She wants to speak with you when you're well enough." "To thank me?" "I think it's more than that. They take life debts very seriously. You saved the heir to their throne. That's not something they take lightly." Over the next few days, Jake healed faster than the doctors expected. Humans were good at that, apparently. By the end of the week, he could sit up and walk around the medical bay. The gel had done its job. Most of his burns had healed to pink new skin. It was tender and sensitive, but it worked. The doctors cleared him for visitors on the 8th day. Jake was sitting in a chair, wearing a clean uniform that felt strange against his healing skin, when the door to the medical bay opened. Queen entered, followed by 2 guards and Commander Vilas. Jake tried to stand, but raised a hand to stop him. "Please remain seated. You are still recovering." Jake settled back in his chair. He had only seen the Queen from a distance before. Up close, she was even more impressive. Her crystalline body was the deepest blue he had ever seen, and the patterns of light that moved through her were like watching stars. "Your Majesty," Jake said, "I'm glad the princess is okay." Light pulsed in what Jake had learned was the equivalent of a smile. "She is more than okay. She is eager to see you again. She talks about you constantly." "She was very brave." "She was terrified," corrected gently. "But you made her feel safe. That is a gift I can never fully repay." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He had never been good at accepting praise. "I was just doing my job, Your Majesty." "No," his voice was firm. "Your job was to protect the ambassador, not to run into a burning building to save a child from another species. What you did went far beyond duty." She moved closer and sat in the chair that Helen usually occupied. Her guards stayed by the door, giving them some privacy. "I need you to understand something, Jake. In culture, when someone saves a life, especially the life of a child, it creates a bond, a debt that must be honored. What you did for has created the deepest kind of debt, one that I must repay." "You don't owe me anything," Jake said. "I'm just glad she's safe." Light pulsed in complex patterns that Jake could not read. "That is exactly why I must honor this debt. You expect nothing. You ask for nothing. You acted purely out of compassion and courage. Those are rare qualities in any species." She was quiet for a moment, and Jake could hear the faint humming sound that made when they were thinking deeply. "I want to offer you something," said finally. "It is called the royal favor. It is an ancient honor that has not been granted to anyone outside the royal family in over 200 years. Your Majesty, I don't need." "Please let me explain," leaned forward slightly. "The royal favor creates a permanent bond between you and the royal household. It grants you several privileges. You would have a standing invitation to the palace. You could request an audience with me at any time. You would be given quarters in the palace for when you visit, and you would hold the title of a title I am creating specifically for you." Jake did not know what to say. The offer was overwhelming. "I don't understand. Why would you do all this?" Because you gave me back my daughter, said simply. Because you showed me that courage and compassion are not limited by species. Because I want the people to remember what you did, and I want to ensure that the bond between our peoples grows stronger. Jake looked down at his hands, at the pink new skin covering his palms. He thought about small crystalline arms wrapped around his neck. He thought about Queen's light flashing in the courtyard as she watched the palace burn. There's a condition, continued. If you accept the royal favor, I ask that you help us create educational exchanges between human and children, wants to learn about Earth and about fire safety. I think there is much our peoples can learn from each other. Educational exchanges? Jake asked. Yes, you could teach children about fire, about heat, about the things that terrify us but that you understand. And our children could teach human children about cold, about crystal formation, about our culture. It would be a way to build bridges between our worlds. Jake thought about his niece Emma back on Earth. He thought about all the kids who would grow up in a galaxy where humans and work together, where fear of the unknown could be replaced by understanding. I'm not a teacher, Jake said. I'm a security guard. Before that, I was a firefighter. I don't know how to run educational programs. You don't need to run them, said. You just need to inspire them. You would be a symbol of the courage and friendship our peoples can share. The actual programs would be managed by educators, but having you involved would give them weight and meaning. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Queen, at the hope in the patterns of her light. He looked at Ambassador Helen, who had entered the room at some point and was standing by the door with tears in her eyes. Can I ask you something, Your Majesty? Jake said. Of course. Why me? There are other humans who are braver, smarter, more qualified. Why offer this to a security guard from Colorado? Slight pulsed in that smile pattern again. Because you are the one who ran into the fire. You are the one who saved my daughter. The universe is full of people who talk about courage and compassion. You are someone who demonstrates it. That is why you. Jake took a deep breath and immediately regretted it as his healing ribs protested. But he smiled through the pain. Okay, he said, I accept. The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks later, after Jake had fully recovered. It was held in the palace's main hall, the one that had not been damaged by the fire. Thousands of attended, their lights creating a display like the Northern Lights. Jake stood at the center of it all, wearing a formal uniform that the Earth Diplomatic Corps had provided. He felt out of place and nervous. Public speaking had never been his strength. Queen stood before him in robes that sparkled with embedded crystals. Princess stood beside her mother, her small body glowing with excitement. When she saw Jake, her light flashed so brightly that people nearby had to shield their eyes. The Queen spoke in, her voice carrying through the hall. Jake did not understand all of it, but Ambassador Grant had given him the basic outline. Was explaining what had happened, what Jake had done, and why she was granting him the royal favor. Then she switched to English so Jake could understand. Jake, you have shown us that courage is not about being unafraid. It is about acting despite fear. You have shown us that compassion knows no boundaries of species or culture. You have given us back what is most precious, and for that we honor you today. She held out a crystal medallion on a silver chain. The crystal was carved into the shape of a flame, forever frozen in crystalline form. I name you, protector of the innocent, bridge between our peoples. May you carry this title with the same honor and courage you have already shown. Jake bowed his head and placed the medallion around his neck. It was cold against his chest, a constant reminder of the people he had helped. Then Princess stepped forward. She had insisted on being part of the ceremony. In her small hands, she held a data tablet. These are our plans, she said in careful English, her accent charming and earnest. For the schools, for teaching your people and my people, will you help us make them real? Jake took the tablet and looked at the excited hope in slight patterns. He thought about all the children on both worlds who would benefit from these programs, who would grow up understanding each other instead of fearing each other. Yes, he said, I'll help. Slight blazed with joy, and she threw her arms around Jake's waist in a hug. The crowd erupted in flashing lights and the musical sounds of their approval. Jake looked out at the sea of crystalline faces, at Queen whose light pulsed with gratitude. At 6 months after the fire, Jake stood in a classroom on the capital planet, watching 20 young children examine a candle flame with fascination and fear. Fire is not evil, Jake explained, speaking slowly so the translator could keep up. Fire is a tool. Like any tool, it can be helpful or harmful depending on how you use it. One of the children, a small crystalline girl named Senna, raised her hand. Her light pulsed with curiosity. But fire destroyed the palace. How can it be helpful? Jake smiled. This was exactly the kind of question he had learned to expect. Fire also cooks food, provides warmth, and helps us make metal and glass. The fire at the palace was an accident because the safety systems failed, but fire itself is neither good nor bad. He demonstrated with the candle, showing how the flame needed three things to survive: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Remove any one of those three and the fire went out. The children watched in amazement as he smothered the flame with a glass cup, cutting off the oxygen. Princess sat in the front row, her light flashing with enthusiasm every time Jake explained something new. She had appointed herself as his teaching assistant, helping translate concepts that the automatic system struggled with. She was brilliant for her age, and her excitement about learning was infectious. After the class ended, Jake helped the children clean up their workstations. The education system was different from Earth's. Classes were smaller, more hands-on, and focused heavily on practical understanding rather than memorization. "You're getting better at this," a voice said from the doorway. Jake turned to find Commander Vilas watching him. The guard had been skeptical of Jake at first, but over the months, they had developed a friendship based on mutual respect. "Thanks, the kids make it easy. They actually want to learn." "Queen wishes to see you when you have time," Vilas said. "She has news about the exchange program with Earth." Jake nodded. His quarters in the palace were just down the hall from the new education wing that had been built to replace the destroyed thermal gardens. It was convenient for his teaching work and gave him easy access to the royal family. He found Queen in her private study, reviewing reports on a holographic display. She looked up when he entered and dismissed the display with a gesture. "Jake, thank you for coming. Please sit." Jake sat in one of the specially designed chairs that accommodated human anatomy. They had gone out of their way to make him comfortable in the palace. "I received confirmation today," said. "Earth has approved the first exchange group. 20 human children will arrive next month to study culture and science, and 20 of our children will travel to Earth to learn about your world." Jake felt a surge of pride. This was what he had been working toward for months. The educational exchanges had been his idea, and her staff had made them real. "That's amazing, Your Majesty." "It is largely because of you," said. "Your work with our children has shown both our peoples that cooperation is not only possible but beneficial." The council was skeptical at first, but seeing the results of your classes changed many minds. "Did most of the work," Jake said honestly. "She's the one who convinced the other kids that humans weren't scary." Slight pulsed with amusement. "She adores you. She tells everyone that you are the bravest person in the galaxy." "She's giving me too much credit." "No, I don't think she is." Stood and walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. New construction was happening where the thermal gardens had once stood. This time, they were building with proper fire suppression systems designed by human engineers. "I wanted to ask you something," said without turning around. "Your contract with Earth's diplomatic corps ends in 3 months. Have you decided what you will do next?" Jake had been thinking about that question a lot lately. His original assignment was supposed to last 1 year. The fire and its aftermath had complicated things, but the time was approaching when he would need to make a decision. "I'm not sure yet," Jake admitted. Turned to face him. "I would like to offer you a permanent position here, as the director of cultural exchange between our peoples. You would have full authority to develop programs, coordinate with Earth, and continue your teaching work." "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not qualified for something like that. I'm just a guy who knows about fires." "You are said firmly. "You are the symbol of courage and friendship between our worlds. Yes, we would hire educators and administrators to handle the details. But we need someone who embodies the spirit of what we're trying to achieve. Someone both our peoples trust and respect." Jake thought about his life back on Earth. His apartment in Denver that he barely spent time in. His job with the diplomatic corps that he had taken because he needed a change after leaving the fire department. His family who loved him but rarely understood his choices. Then he thought about the children who had overcome their fear of fire because he had shown them it could be safe. He thought about Princess's excitement when she learned something new. He thought about the possibility of building something that would last for generations. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Jake asked. "Of course, this is not a decision to make lightly," returned to her desk. "There is one more thing. Ambassador Grant asked me to give you this." She handed Jake a message tablet. He opened it and found a recorded message from Helen Grant. She was smiling in the recording, looking far less stressed than she had in the months following the fire. "Jake, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to tell you in person, but my schedule has been impossible lately. I've been recalled to Earth for a promotion. They're making me the head of the entire Diplomatic Corps Alien Relations Division. They said it's because of the work we did with but we both know it's because of what you did. You saved Princess, and in doing so, you created a friendship between our species that's already bearing fruit. I'm proud to have worked with you, and I'm grateful for your courage. Whatever you decide to do next, know that you have my full support. Helen." Jake set down the tablet, feeling a mix of emotions he could not quite name. Pride, certainly, but also a sense of responsibility. He had started something here, something important. Could he really walk away from it now? Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into his teaching work while he considered offer. He taught fire safety classes to children. He consulted with the engineers rebuilding the palace gardens. He worked with educators from both worlds to develop curriculum for the exchange programs. And he spent time with Princess, who had become like a little sister to him. She was smart, curious, and fearless in a way that reminded him of his niece Emma. Wanted to know everything about Earth. What were the oceans like? How did rain work? What did chocolate taste like? Jake did his best to answer her questions, and in return, taught him about culture. She explained the light patterns that indicated different emotions. She taught him about the crystalline structure of her people and how they grew and changed over their long lives. She shared stories about her ancestors and the history of the empire. One evening, Jake was walking through the palace gardens when he found sitting alone near a fountain. Her light was pulsing in slow, sad patterns. "Hey, what's wrong?" Jake sat down beside her. "I heard you might leave," said quietly, "that your contract is ending soon." "I haven't decided yet. But you might go back to Earth and not come back." Jake saw the worry in her light patterns and felt his heart ache. "Even if I go back to Earth, I would visit. You're stuck with me now, kid." "It's not the same," Slight dimmed. "I want you to stay, Mother wants you to stay, everyone wants you to stay." "What do you want me to do here?" Jake asked gently. "Teach us, help us understand your world, be my friend." Looked up at him. "You saved my life, Jake. I know everyone talks about that, but you also made me brave. Before the fire, I was afraid of so many things. But you showed me that being afraid is okay as long as you don't let fear stop you from doing what's right." Jake put his arm around her small, crystalline shoulders. "You were always brave, you just needed someone to show you. Then stay and show other children too, please." That night, Jake made his decision. He sent a message to Earth Diplomatic Corps, declining to renew his contract. Then he sent a message to Queen, accepting her offer to become the Director of Cultural Exchange. The response came within minutes, just 3 words in English: "Thank you." 2 months later, Jake stood on a landing platform watching the first group of human children arrive. They stepped off the transport ship with wide eyes, staring at the crystalline architecture and the blue-skinned who had come to greet them. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, looked up at Jake nervously. "Is it true you ran into a burning building to save a princess?" Jake knelt down to her level. "It's true, and you know what? She's right over there, and she's been looking forward to meeting all of you." He pointed to where stood with a group of children. The princess waved enthusiastically, her light flashing in welcome. "She looks nice," the human girl said. "She is nice and brave, and you're going to learn so much from each other." Over the next year, Jake built what he had promised. The cultural exchange programs flourished. Human children learned about science and art. Children learned about Earth's diverse ecosystems and cultures. Friendships formed that crossed species lines. Jake taught fire safety classes that became so popular they had waiting lists. He consulted on safety protocols for mixed-species environments. He gave speeches about courage and compassion at schools across both worlds. But his favorite moments were the quiet ones, teaching a child how to roast a marshmallow over a carefully controlled fire, watching explain crystal formation to a fascinated human student, seeing the fear in young eyes transform into curiosity and understanding. Queen had been right. He was not just an educator or administrator. He was a symbol, a reminder that courage meant acting despite fear, that compassion could cross any boundary, that a single act of bravery could change the course of history. One evening, 2 years after the fire, Jake stood in the rebuilt thermal gardens with And. The new gardens were beautiful, filled with plants from both Earth and everywhere there were safety systems designed by engineers from both species working together. "I never thanked you properly," said, watching the sunset paint the crystal walls in shades of gold and orange. "You've thanked me plenty, Your Majesty." "No, I mean for staying. You could have gone back to Earth, resumed your old life. Instead, you chose to stay here and build something new." Jake looked at who was examining a rose bush with scientific fascination. "This is my life now. I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Good," Slight pulsed warmly, "because we cannot imagine this world without you." As the sun set over the capital, Jake thought about the path that had brought him here. A simple security job, a catastrophic fire, a moment of choice. He had run into those flames thinking only of saving one child. He had not known that he was also saving the future. The human children called him Mister, the children called him, but to Princess he was just Jake, her friend, her teacher, her hero. And that, Jake thought, was the greatest honor of all. Grant, who was definitely crying now, he thought about how he had just been doing his job that day, how he had just done what felt right. And somehow, that simple act had changed everything. Regretted that choice. He hoped they were ready, because there was only one way down and they were taking it right now. Telling him to stop. Jake ignored them all. He took 3 deep breaths, filling his lungs with clean air. Then he ran into the fire,